You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And as always, we are your hosts for the show. You know, I got to say, every time I hear that lightsaber ignite when our theme song comes on, I get goosebumps. I do. I have to admit, I get goosebumps. And, you know, what that means, it's time for a Star Wars discussion. Tonight, I think we got a really good one.
This it fits with your whole Star Wars, your lightsaber igniting thing.
It does. It really does. And I mean, honestly, I think that... So this, of course, is part of our whole Journey to Ahsoka thing that we/you have going on. Where I know you came up with a bunch of topics. Now, if you missed Friday's show... And look, Friday was hopping. A lot of you guys have opinions on midi-chlorians, apparently, because not only did we get a lot of viewers on that one, which, of course, we thank you, not only do we have a lot of new subscribers, which I'd like to welcome all our new subscribers, like to welcome anybody that's watching on Twitch right now, because we're streaming live on Twitch, but the chat and particularly the comments on that one blew up. I mean, I was answering a lot of stuff. So you guys have some strong opinions on midi-chlorians, and that's great. So hopefully you guys have equally strong opinions on our choices for our favorite Jedi. Now, keep in mind, there's some ground rules that I want to lay out right away here, okay? Because I already know, especially because people are more active in not only the chats, but the comments now. I am well aware that there are just a gazillion Jedi out there. And in the interest of full disclosure, which really isn't a surprise, because a lot of times we do see, we probably should have called this show Eye to Eye, a Star Wars podcast, not head to head, because we tend to agree more than we disagree. But our top three are pretty much the same. Only 4 and 5 differ. And a lot of that, I think, and certainly you could speak to your choices, but honestly, when you really look at the Star Wars universe, who's had the most impact, who has the most power and all that, it's kind of an obvious thing. I mean, even if we were doing like a straight up, okay, these guys are the best, like not necessarily our favorite, but the best. And by the way, Ronaldo chats in, he says, you know what, I'm going to put it up. I always say this, but I'm actually going to put it up. He says, hey, my Jawa tribe. You know, Ronaldo always comes up with like some new way of greeting us or whatever, which of course we always appreciate. But yeah, I mean, I just think that it's somewhat of an obvious thing, although we could debate, and certainly we're going to do that tonight. I mean, we've put these in the top 5, but honestly, I don't know about you, but I probably could have moved the order a little bit.
Okay.
You know, like I don't necessarily know if... I mean, right now, let's put it this way. Where I have my top 5 is probably where I would always have it, but I could see a couple of shifts depending on the day.
I would probably shift my 1 and 2 around, but that's
about it.
Do it. Yeah.
Well, and Ronaldo says it should be Leku to Leku, a Star Wars podcast. Oh, yeah, that honestly, nice. that would have been kind of cool. But, you know, again, basically we're going to be going over each other's top 5. We're just so you guys know, we'll give I think it might start with you. Might be your 5, then my 5, then your 4, then my 4, and we'll kind of go that way, and we'll try to maybe roll it that way and just keep the discussion to pretty much each of our choices. Now, before we start rolling this out, because I know that people when they're watching, they always hate it when there's like too much of a build-up, and I know I hate that as a YouTube viewer or whatever, Twitter, any kind of social media thing. I'm always like, all right, come on, get to it, guys. We get it. But being that I'm on the flip side here and I'm hosting the show, it's a little bit different. So is there anything that you want to say basically leading up as far as how you made your choices, anything by way of introduction?
I would just say like most of my picks, I guess if anyone who knows me, probably in who Star Wars would be surprised by my picks. Simply because of a lot of it is driven based upon either their attributes or their personality.
Yeah, I can see that.
And, their personality, most of these characters in some way, shape, or form vibe with more so like, and this, I guess that's why it's kind of like my favorite. Because I think if we're looking at best or more powerful, that's a little bit more factual. Like you
Well,
can
that's what
kind
I
of
was
really
going to
truly
say.
debate that. Versus
Right.
favorite, it's more like, okay, what do I just,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
grabs me.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do that, right? Where I wanted to do favorite because, yes, if you were just going on a strict list of most powerful, I don't honestly know if the list would look that different, though. I mean, again, you could probably bring in some people from the expanded universe or, even some of the more outliers in canon. But honestly, I mean, when you crafted this, pretty much what was your inspiration to do so? Like, what attributes, what things made up your favorite Jedi? Because it's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah, and I think everybody has their own, even and that's why it's cool to have the discussion because, there may be things that we didn't consider, like, oh, I might have left a person out because of certain things, but then
Hmm.
it may be on someone else's list. And listening to their rationale as to why they're their favorite, I may now have a different opinion. Like, well, you know what? It's a good point. Didn't think about that. All right. I guess this person would kind of be one of my favorites. Like, there's one on there that most people probably would wonder why they're not on my list, but I have a reason for it. So,
Yeah, which I'm
it's
sure we'll
just my
get
own.
to.
Yeah, definitely. So that's the fun part about this one. Kind of want to keep it fun, and less, I guess, more whimsical and fun versus something that's a little
Like an
bit more
academic exercise, basically.
academic. There you go.
Yeah.
That's the word I
No,
was looking.
I
Academic.
totally know what you mean. And that's where I think a lot of Star Wars fans would go with this. They would be like, I can't believe you had this guy on your list and you didn't have this guy. And, they would start to go into pretty much all the attributes and, what makes them more.
Mhm.
And again, I mean, this is where the distinction comes in. I cannot emphasize this enough. This is top 5 favorite. This isn't necessarily who we're saying the best. Although, I mean, arguably, some of the people on this list, each one of our lists actually, would be considered the best, probably, when all is said and done and you look at it. But I
Mhm.
agree. A more whimsical, little bit more fun, kind of because again, this show is basically about a bunch of Star Wars fans hanging out. I mean, we keep pumping up our Discord server, which I'm going to do now. Uh, we
Knew
do
that
have
was
a
coming.
Discord. So of course, it's always coming. It's going to be every week at the beginning of the show. There's a couple of things I'm going to talk about. The first thing is the Discord server. You guys can check out the link in the description, join it. It's going to be an extension of this community. But honestly, once I got a little bit into Discord, I realized that our show, what we were trying to do with this show, is really nothing more than a live stream version of Discord. It's pretty much in that same spirit, where it's just, look, we're a bunch of fans that love Star Wars that maybe we have varying degrees of love. There's some like crazy geeky super fans or whatever, and then there's a lot of casual people. But you know what? We are the home to both of those type, and that's why this is the perfect show for that because it's really just about a bunch of people getting together and hey, let's just discuss this or whatever. It's not so much of a kind of an academic sort of, we're dispensing all this knowledge or something. You guys, I mean, a lot of times there's people that watch the show that have more knowledge than we do. And with that said, if you guys want to help and you want to support, speaking of Jedi, we have our various packages on buymeacoffee.com, right? Where we talk about you guys could do a one-time donation. You can either support us with these packages. The Padawan level's $5 a month. Jedi Knight level's $10 a month. Jedi Master level is $25. You see some of the things you get. You get some special channels on our Discord. We really want to make an effort to get to know you guys a little bit, have you guys maybe be mods eventually. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to doing this. Plus, it supports us. And so we appreciate, anything that you guys can or are willing to do, even if it just means liking this video and subscribing to the channel. But now that we got all this housekeeping stuff out of the way, I think now it's time to get to the actual discussion. So your number 5 is interesting. Your number 5 is Plo Koon. So there's a lot of people that you could have chosen. You could have chosen Ayla Secura, Shakti. You could have chosen Ki-Adi-Mundi. You could have chosen actually a whole plethora of these, what I would call maybe I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but like the secondary players. They're not your typical main guys that you normally see in, I guess they're not really part of the normal discussion of Star Wars. When we bring up Jedi. Now, keep in mind, one of the things that I think is interesting about Plo Koon, and I wonder how many, I almost use this as the picture, by the way. So in order to throw people off track, in The Mandalorian Season 2, they actually made up this guy to look like Plo Koon. They were trying to make it seem like Plo Koon was the guy that was going to rescue them instead of Luke Skywalker, because they were trying to throw people off track. They didn't want to reveal that it was Luke. They wanted to keep that a secret. And so they did a bunch of still images and stuff like that of Plo Koon as the one. But that's, they could have chosen anybody. Again, Plo Koon's a guy that, in a lot of ways, I think he's kind of an underrated Jedi, in a sense. But what was your reason for choosing him as your number 5?
Well, you kind of hit one of the points, is that he really is such an underrated Jedi. I always liked his look, like that whole mask thing. And and the mask isn't really for aesthetics. It's really serves a practical purpose. He's from this planet called Doran, and he their air quality is different than most planets. So he wears that mask to kind of help filter out the air so he can get what he needs out of the atmosphere. And then those little goggles that he wears are just to kind of keep his eyes moist. Because of course, obviously, you can tell he's not really in complete human. He's more of a humanoid, but he's definitely not human. Plo Koon is also really cool because just of his demeanor. Like, I've always been enamored with how he presents himself, his voice. He has a very calm, soothing presence. Like, nothing really seems to rattle him too much. He's really level-headed, and he's actually the one who actually brought Ahsoka to the actual Jedi Order. Most
That's
people
true.
forget
A
that,
lot of
but
people forget that. I forget
he's the
that
one
once
that
in a while, actually.
but he's the one who brought Ahsoka. And so even though he didn't end up being her master, they still shared a very special bond because of that. And he always kind of kept an eye on her, and especially during the Clone Wars, sometimes they would do missions together, and he would kind of engage, how she's progressing um, as a Padawan, especially under the tutelage and leadership of Anakin. Then I know that kind of has to be like, okay, this is kind of be a little cumbersome, but Plo Koon, yeah, he's very, like I said, he's just very cool. He's very level headed. Nothing seems to really bother him too much, or he kind of gives everyone one of those, that feeling of assurance and confidence. And that's exactly how he carries himself. He's a formidable fighter. He's actually a pretty darn good pilot too. He's actually like one of the better pilots in the High Council. And that's another thing too. He sits on the Jedi Council as well.
Yep.
So he's very, he has his accolade. He's very prestigious, but he doesn't choose to really be, out front. He's kind of like a behind the scenes guy, but don't mistake that he's not really powerful, because he is.
Well, the thing I mean, you bring up a couple of things. I mean, one, there's a couple of things that I appreciate about how they depict Plo Koon and some of their other characters, which I don't think Star Wars always gets enough credit. And that is, they create these really interesting humanoid characters. They're obviously not human, but they are humanoid, but they have actually very distinct personalities, where I think in a lot of sci-fi in particular, they will have. I mean, Star Trek doesn't do this so much, because I think that they're another franchise that excels at showing humanoids, that probably more so than Star Wars even. But Star Wars does a really good job of creating these fascinating humanoid characters that don't necessarily, because every time they have a humanoid character, it's like they breathe the same air we do, they eat the same food, that kind of a thing. They just look different, but they don't necessarily act different. But in this, they paid attention to that. He has to wear this mask in order to breathe our atmosphere, or at least the atmosphere that most of the humans are breathing. So that's one aspect that I think is cool. Another one is, you bring up his sort of calm, cool, collective, like, hey, nothing really phases me kind of thing. He totally reminds me of the character in the Empire Strikes Back, that one, the shield will be down in a moment. You may start your landing. He's just kind of a
General Veers.
Yeah, General. Yeah, he's just like this easygoing, kind of like, yeah, man, I got this. And that's pretty much how Plo Koon is. He doesn't really freak out. He doesn't make any of these big sweeping kind of asides. He's not dispensing all this, wisdom or whatever. He's just kind of like, hey, man, we're good. I've got this. And you see some of this in the High Republic too. You see a couple of those characters are kind of like Plo Koon that way.
Yeah, he's just very confident. He doesn't allow things to get him rattled too much, so he's able to, and he's more logical too. He kind of reminds me of like Spock were a Jedi in a way.
No, I
he
can
has
see
that
that.
very, just very logical, very methodical. He's talented, and he does dispense his wisdom, but it's not like, like a Yoda type thing. But he just it's more of a, did you think about it for this? From like, he's more practical. He's like, did you think about things from this perspective? It's like, or not everything is as though as it seems, and you might want to, he's kind of like a cool, that cool dad, like almost like just a very calm, easygoing dad,
Sure.
almost like an Obama or something like that. Like, that's kind of who he
Yeah, I
reminds
mean,
me of.
honestly, I would love to. I really wish we had seen more of him
Me
in
too.
the prequels and even in the Clone Wars series. I mean, I think that in a lot of ways he was sort of underutilized. And
Definitely. And he
he's
just looks
another
cool.
He does. And he's another one of those guys that you sort of latch on to him and say, you know what? I wish we could see more of this guy. So absolutely. Ronaldo, unsurprisingly, has a couple of chats. Now his number 5 is interesting. I'm glad, Ronaldo, that you're actually following along and giving yours. And anybody else that's watching, we're still doing number 5. So if you guys want to give your number 5, and of course, if you're watching after the fact, that you can always obviously chat your top 5 Jedi into the chat section. And again, we also have a poll up, like I said, in our community tab. So it's not going to really expire like the chat version does. So go into the community tab on our channel, and we have a bunch of choices up there, and just vote on who you think is the most powerful or whatever. But Ronaldo says, my number 5 is Rey. There, I said it. I love her personality, the story I really love, especially in episode 8. I'll always defend this character, ever. Well, look.
Ooh,
Okay, but here
I'd
comes the
love to see
thing.
him go.
No.
Let
But
him go with David.
look. No. David would understand. And I'll tell you why David would understand. David would understand because of this next comment. Besides, I have a crush on Daisy Ridley. That right there, I think is, look, the force is strong with this one. That's all I'm going to say. He said, also, imagine my face when I found out a Jedi and the protagonist had my name. Most people just call me Rey. Yeah, we thought about that, but you're always going to be Ronaldo to us. I mean, that's just. I mean, I can't not say that anymore. You're one of our longest running viewers at this point. It would just be too much. But actually, that's a good point though. Rey being part of the conversation. I could, again, if you're going, no matter if you're going by power or if you're going by favorite, because again, I mean, when you're actually discussing the world of favorite Jedi and not, ranking them according to power or some other metric. Look, favorite anybody could be. I mean, you could have like, I don't know, Ahsoka or something as your number one, Now, I mean, obviously she's not going to be more powerful than Anakin or Luke or Yoda or any of these guys. But I mean, if you're talking about your favorite Jedi, as Daryl pointed out earlier, this is a conversation where this is directly responsible for Lucas, or maybe in some of the Disney era movies and shows and comics or whatever, that they can speak to you, right? I mean, certain characters just speak to you differently. I mean, if somebody had Jocasta Nu as their favorite Jedi, that could be based on that really cool Darth Vader comic where she dueled him. I mean, she ultimately lost, of course, but the point is that there's some attribute that they possess, or there's just something about them. That's why I think that this conversation, this is why I'm glad that you framed it this way when you came up with this topic. When you said, look, let's talk about our favorite, not necessarily best, most powerful, greatest, or whatever word you want to use in there that would be a little bit more weighted academically. And okay, you have to look, and I mean, don't get me wrong, those are fun too. But I think that this is a more interesting conversation because this is a little bit more personal. This is who in the Star Wars universe is really speaking to you. Now, in Ronaldo's case, Rey's his number 5. In your case, Plo Koon is your number 5. In my case, Qui-Gon is my number 5.
Okay.
And
I almost picked him too.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of. It was really kind of difficult. Full disclosure, I almost made Ahsoka my number 5. And the reason why I almost put Ahsoka, she's not on my list. Spoiler alert, Ahsoka is not on my list, but she very well could have been because, she's somebody that I absolutely hated when she was first introduced. And she grew to be one of my favorite characters. I mean, honestly, if you know me at all, I mean, even if you just know me through the show, it's really kind of surprising that she's not on this list, for me anyway, because I did I mean, if you think about it, the power of the writing of that character, to take her from somebody that I absolutely hated to somebody that I now absolutely love, I mean, that speaks volumes, to be honest. And then she's also one of the few that we've actually seen develop from real little kid, in early Padawan days, all the way up through. I mean, you can make the argument that Obi-Wan's kind of the same way, but Ahsoka was even younger when we met her. And what makes her a little bit more unique in that sense is the fact that with Obi-Wan, even though, yes, we did see him as like a 19-year-old kid, we already had seen him at the end, right? We knew what he turned into. With Ahsoka, she was like brand new. Nobody really knew anything about her, but she could have very easily been on my list or my number 5. But Qui-Gon actually made it because, a lot of the things that you talked about Plo Koon, I see in Qui-Gon. He's extremely wise. he would always go against the Jedi Council. He kind of did what he knew was right and what he knew was best, even if the Jedi Council didn't see it that way. And he just exuded wisdom, patience. He was a great warrior. He was just like everything that you would expect to see in a Jedi. And on top of that, most people agree that if Qui-Gon had been the one that trained Anakin, it would have turned out completely different. So that's one of the reasons why I think I chose Qui-Gon as my number 5, because he's like a really cool character. I think that Liam Neeson really knocked it out of the park, because the Jedi are, as a group, they're written with this kind of white knight sort of thing going, and it's really difficult within that dynamic to create a character that's compelling, that's interesting, that's, a little bit different. And I think that they did that with Qui-Gon.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I love Liam Neeson's portrayal.
Mhm.
He brought Liam kind of brings that kind of a quiet regality to Qui-Gon in a way.
Yeah.
The way he walks, the way he moves and kind of carries himself.
Yep.
But the thing I do love about Qui-Gon is the fact that he was kind of a maverick and a rebel, which the funny thing about it in a story is that, and I thought this was brilliant, is that usually you have like the master who's a little bit more staunch, more traditional, by the book, and it's usually the apprentice that wants to be all, well, why can't we just do this and why can't we just do that? In this case, it's the opposite. Obi-Wan was always trying to remind
That's
him,
true.
like, "Hey, man,
Yeah.
but then the fact that
Oh, man.
Qui-Gon always had ways to justify. He's like, Master Yoda said I should be mindful of the future, but not at the expense of the moment. It's like, oh,
That is a
like
good point, actually. Yeah. That it's kind of like the students going to the master, like, hey, man, I don't really think we should be doing this, I mean, are you sure this doesn't seem right? And he's always, because even when they landed, I mean, I love that whole thing where he was like, oh, great, did we pick up another stray or something like that when he got Anakin? And yeah, I mean, Qui-Gon is actually more the loose cannon, and then Obi-Wan's the guy that's trying to reel him in, and that is a really good point, actually, is that they're really turning the thing on its head, right? Because normally it would be, well, more of the Obi-Wan Anakin type role. See, this is what I think is really interesting about Obi-Wan, is the fact that Obi-Wan was pretty much the same through his whole life that way. Now, he did loosen up around the time of episode 3, and then he became a little bit more whimsical, actually, by the time of A New Hope, right? But I mean, you can kind of see that dynamic in especially episodes 1 and 2, where he was kind of that straight-laced, by-the-book kind of a character, and his master was like a loose cannon, and so he's trying to reel in his master, like, no, master, we shouldn't do this or whatever. Then he becomes the master, and now his apprentice sort of has that Qui-Gon stuff, those things about him, right? So now Obi-Wan is reeling in Anakin much the same way he did Qui-Gon. So in both his role as a Padawan and his role as a master, Obi-Wan seems to be doing the same thing, which I thought was a really interesting thing, writing-wise. Okay, so let's go to your number 4. Your number 4 is Anakin, which, is unsurprising. I mean, look, he's a chosen one. He eventually turns into Vader, but even before he's Vader, he's really amazing. I mean, especially when you start watching the Clone Wars series, which is where I think Anakin really shines. He pretty much has that really cool balance of control and having things, I guess, well at hand, but at the same time, he just has a very loose way of going about it. He has that confidence. It's really cool because, Anakin's just powerful enough to deal with just about anything. And even when he isn't, I don't know, he has a really cool attitude about it. But again, this is your number 4, so you should have the floor. Why did you choose Anakin?
Anakin Skywalker. Yeah, Anakin is always a a cool character, especially by the time we get to episode 3. That's where, from 3, and like you said, through the Clone Wars, is where you really see him shine.
Mm-hmm.
And by Clone Wars, I mean the animated series, not necessarily the movie.
Right.
Um, but yeah, watching his growth and development, in the Clone Wars animated series leading up to the events of Revenge of the Sith was really phenomenal because you got really in depth into his character and understanding a little bit deeper. And like he's a good, to me, Anakin represents what a lot of us guys are a lot of times. Like sometimes we really want to do good, we really want to be the best that we can be, and our own ambition or our own desires sometimes get away in that. And it's not to be malicious or anything like that. It's just sometimes, it just takes the wrong moment sometimes, and it leads you down a dark path. And that's, unfortunately, that's what happened with Anakin. So on that front, he has a big heart. He loves Ahsoka, he loves Obi-Wan, he loves Padme. So he has all this love in his heart for special people that's kind of become family to him, and he pretty much will stop at nothing to protect them. Even though like there's people who may be like in some scenarios, like Obi-Wan, like that's his teacher. So technically Obi-Wan should be protecting Anakin, not the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
But that one episode on the Clone Wars really showed that when he thought Obi-Wan had died because he was undercover, and
Yeah.
just how relentless he was, just going back. I was like, no, because he's had a lot of loss. He's lost his mom. He was afraid of losing Padme, and his loyalty to Ahsoka, like he was with her to the end. He always believed in her.
Mm-hmm.
Just that type of person he was. Beyond. And then of course, yeah, he was cocky. But it's kind of like I'm of the mindset. It's like, hey, man, if you can back it up, it's kind of like, and he always did for the most part. I mean, he's a phenomenal pilot, heck of a swordsman. I mean, geez, like that last battle between him and Obi-Wan in Revenge of the Sith was just, I still get chills like watching that because it's just like,
Oh
man, you just
yeah.
really see how
Yeah. That
good
was
he
just.
is. And the fact that he's not afraid, I mean, like he's fearless, man. I mean, this guy's running up on Palpatine, he's running up on Dooku at any, like he does not care. He's all about getting the job done. And that's the thing. And even if it doesn't mean, if it means sometimes I have to bend the rules a little bit, so be it. If it serves the greater good, he's okay with that. But it's one of those things. Even his, like I said, his loyalty. I just thought about it, but his loyalty to even the troopers, like he was completely loyal to like Rex and Fives and all those guys. He wanted to make sure everybody got back. He hated losing men if they were under his watch while he was a general, and he had tons of ingenuity. He didn't always just like, oh well, okay, this isn't working, I'll find a way around it. So yeah, Anakin was a pretty cool one.
Well, the other thing you got to look at too is that with Anakin, his story arc was really amazing, right? I mean, he,
Hmm.
like you said, he had a lot of loss, and that really is what fueled him throughout the whole thing, and ultimately what led to his downfall. So I can understand him, um, being on there too, because really he's he just has a really interesting story arc. He's also the ultimate cautionary tale. Now, he's not technically considered one of the Lost 20. That's another show that we probably will do, or we'll profile what's known as the Lost 20. Dooku, of course, is a part of that, where those are Jedi that basically turned to the dark side, and, some became Sith, some just, you know, didn't. But they're more or less dark
Walked
side
up.
users. Yeah, they
Yes, they're working
basically
at
walked.
Walmart now.
Yeah. All right, so we got some more chats, obviously. And so Ronaldo agrees with you. Says my number 4 is Anakin. I love this guy since I was a kid. Yeah, his dialogue is not great, but it works for me, and I love his whole story. Well, it really should. I mean, again, you can separate the character from how he's actually portrayed in particularly the films, right? Because, yes, George Lucas is not really a great director or a great writer as far as dialogue goes. And he's terrible at directing actors. This is something that's pretty well known. But the character himself, because you also have to understand, you also have a lot of extra, I guess, material that you can draw from. And Ronaldo even goes on and says, look, I mean, but I think his story works best when he had Clone Wars. It fills a very important part of the story that the movies missed. The thing is, though, and I think this is important to state, because I think a lot of times this is something that's overlooked a little bit, is that everybody will point to, well, the movies didn't get into too much. You really have to watch the Clone Wars. You have to watch Rebels, stuff like that. Absolutely true. But the other thing you have to remember is that really the movies are dealing with the very beginning and the very end, right? So Attack of the Clones is basically the origin of how the Clone Wars began. That's pretty much the point of it. You get a battle or two, but I mean, that's pretty much what it's talking about. Even to the point where Yoda says, begun the Clone Wars has. So it's right at the start of it. And then, of course, Revenge of the Sith is picking up at the tail end of it. This is the point where the Clone Wars are starting to end, where Palpatine is unhatching his plan. He's going to unilaterally take over the galaxy, essentially. He's going to pretty much switch the Republic to an empire. This is pretty much how everything dies, right? The Republic dies, the Empire is born.
Thunderous applause.
Yes, exactly, as Padme pointed out. So, I mean, really, those films were only designed to bookend the Clone Wars, which is why George Lucas wanted to create the Clone Wars. So, it's, even though I know that Ronaldo is just pointing this stuff out, right? But not necessarily criticizing it, I just feel like I should say that because sometimes I think people wish the movies had gone more in depth with that. And they could have, because you and I had long talked about episode 1 should have really been episode 2. They should have started with 2 and then had a 2.5. Like episode 2 could have been maybe some, like a Clone Wars type of thing. And then episode 3 could be that. And I think that would have made a better trilogy. But, that's neither here nor there now. David joins us again. He says, hello, gentlemen. Vader should be higher, meaning Anakin. That makes me wonder where Rey is on Daryl's list. And I'm sure Eric has Andor at number 1, even though Andor doesn't have any midi-chlorians. See what I did? Well, the thing is,
You're
is that
wrong
again,
on both accounts, but
yeah, I mean, I do feel. All right, so just to catch up, because I don't know when David joined, but Daryl had Plo Koon at 5. He has Anakin at 4. I had Qui-Gon Jinn at 5. I have yet to reveal my number 4, which I will in a few minutes. David, to catch us up, has Obi-Wan at number 5 and Luke at number 4. Okay, that makes sense. And I can understand why somebody might actually have Luke a little bit lower than other people. Luke is one of those guys, and again, I really want to stress this, and I'm going to keep stressing this through the show because I know that we're going to get comments on this. This is our favorite. This does not necessarily mean, and even David, when you say it should be higher, yes, if you're talking about from a power standpoint, but even then, and when we actually finish out the list, I will address all of this because I will talk about the actual power of each of these guys versus our favorites. But I want to wait until we're pretty much through both of our lists before I do that. Certainly, though, you could put Anakin higher. There would be nothing wrong with that. But again, this is sort of a favorites thing, not necessarily a most powerful thing. And Ronaldo going along with that says, I mean, it's a very subjective list. And it is, as long as you're talking about favorites. Where it becomes more objective is if you're saying, like, okay, look, we're going to rank the Jedi according to power, or rank them according to, I mean, you could really use any metric, right? You can use popularity. Who are the most popular Jedi? Who are the most powerful Jedi? Who are, you could do things like that where it's a little bit more objective. And now you do have to do a little bit more homework. I mean, I could reorder this and actually put the most powerful Jedi. I mean, look, I've been dealing with this since 1977. Okay, then I started reading the expanded universe in 1991. I mean, this is before a lot of people were even born here. So I could actually put together a list of, look, here are the most powerful or whatever. But we thought this would be more fun because, look, everybody's going to have their favorites, and it might be weird. I mean, I brought up Jocasta Nu before. I mean, there's people that I've run into that is one of their favorite Jedi. Well, I mean, she's not going to show up. I mean, don't get me wrong. She's actually more powerful than what people would think. Like, she would, if you did a list based on power, she would actually rank a lot higher than what a lot of people would assume based on just seeing her scene in Attack of the Clones. But, is she really anybody's favorite? I mean, hey, if you guys, if she ranks in your favorites, like even if she's number like 12 or something, I wouldn't mind hearing that. But this I thought would be a lot more fun of a discussion because, like Ronaldo says, right? It's subjective. I mean, anybody could be their favorites. And speaking of favorite, we hope that we're your favorite. So why don't you guys hit that like button and show us that you're liking this video and that, I mean, hey, right? I think we're worthy of a like. So go ahead and hit the like button while we're going on about this. Okay, my number 4. My number 4 is Obi-Wan. All right, so that was essentially David's number 5. That's my number 4. My number 4 is Obi-Wan because, again, part of what really makes I guess, what's the best way I can put this? When you're dealing with some of my favorite Jedi, my favorites, a lot of it too is compelling story. Are they interesting? Because you can actually have some like super powerful guys that just frankly aren't that interesting. But Obi-Wan, I think, really represents, and I brought this up before when we were talking about Anakin, and even when we were talking about Qui-Gon, right? Where Obi-Wan really had the same attitude through the whole thing. Qui-Gon, who was Obi-Wan's master, he was just like, dude, what are you doing? Like, the Jedi Council would never approve this. You're going off the rails pretty much. I mean, this is just, like, seriously? Obi-Wan is very much a by the book. Look, the rules that the Jedi Order established are there for a reason. They are there to pretty much protect us, to protect others. We need to follow them. And so he was pretty much kind of like, we got to follow this. Then he finally becomes a master. Well, who's his apprentice? Anakin. Well, now Anakin is exhibiting a lot of the same things that Qui-Gon did, right? He's like this loose cannon. And it's like, oh, great. Now I got to deal with this all over again. So now he's trying to be like, okay, the lightsaber is your life. You got to do this. I mean, it's just really interesting to me, Obi-Wan's progression from the time that he's a Padawan all the way to the time he gets to Luke. Because if you look at the way he deals with Luke, it's sort of like he actually learned his lessons from Qui-Gon and Anakin. And he understands a little bit, because Luke is the same thing as Anakin, right? He was kind of a loose cannon too, more out of ignorance than anything else. But Obi-Wan, you could see that he learned how to deal with that better. To the point to where when Yoda in episode 5 was all like, nah, he's too old, he's too much like his dad and all that, Obi-Wan was the one coming to Luke's defense, which that's a really subtle thing. If you really stop and think about that, and you go all the way back to the way Obi-Wan was in The Phantom Menace, and you take that into consideration, that's huge. And I also like in the Obi-Wan series, how they filled in a lot of gaps and how Obi-Wan was getting over his failure at, during the Clone Wars and losing to the Empire. And I mean, there's just like a lot of really rich, cool things. And Obi-Wan to me was just a really interesting character. So I don't know. What do you think before we get to the audience?
The only problem I have with Obi-Wan is just that because he is so by the book, it kind of stifles him in a way. Like, I think Obi-Wan would have been more powerful, or been, at least in some ways, in certain situations, if he would relinquish that. I know that's part of just his general makeup and who he is as an individual, as a character, and I think, that was a cool thing about he working with Anakin, especially like when he's the master now. But then see, the thing is, which was cool, and I would have loved to have seen this with Qui-Gon, is that when Obi-Wan was Qui-Gon's Padawan, he was still learning a lot, and at a certain pace.
Right.
The thing about Anakin is that Anakin not only just was good, but he grew quickly. Like, there's a huge jump between what you see in Attack of the Clones versus him in Revenge of the Sith. I
Right.
mean, and at that point,
Although,
essentially he's
but in that
basically a
defense,
master.
though, yes, but you also have to remember there is a lot of time between episode 2 and 3.
True, but I mean, just saying, like, and that's what I'm saying. We never got to see that with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. We never got to see like what that would have looked like on a maturation scale. You know what I mean?
Oh
But
yeah, I
looking
mean,
at
I get it. I mean, I understand because, basically what you're saying is, and again, so the growth that we saw in Anakin and the maturity that we saw develop in Anakin, we never really got to see with Obi-Wan. It was kind of like, even
we
though there
did,
was
but
a
we didn't.
huge chunk, well, there was a bigger chunk though between episodes 1 and 2 than 2 and 3.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is like, power wise, like, okay, what I'm saying is this: when you look at Obi-Wan, and granted, like, he fared better against Dooku the first time because he
Yeah,
was
I know. That
patient.
was really weird to me.
See what I'm saying? And that's
Because
my
that
point.
is
Like, he
true.
was
Like, he
patient.
was, he was actually way better against Dooku in episode 2 than he was in episode 3. But you know what I think that
And
is because in episode 3, I don't necessarily, like, I think that Obi-Wan was just more prepared for, because again, Obi-Wan grew in power as well. It's just that, he's all Sith Lords are a speciality and all this stuff, right? And I mean, honestly, it goes back to what Yoda had said, that, I mean, ego and all that and pride and everything has taken over even the more older, experienced Jedi. And I think that was a little bit of a pride thing where Obi-Wan was just like, "Pfft, I could do this." And he wasn't prepared. Whereas in episode 2, I think he was more prepared because he wasn't quite as powerful and he didn't have the whole Clone Wars adventures under his belt. And so he sees Dooku because, I mean, other than Darth Maul, that was kind of like his only other real interaction with the Sith. And so he was a little bit more cautious, and that's where I think that's coming from.
well, and that's what I'm talking about skill wise. So when you look at, like, and I'm glad you brought up Maul. So when we look at, you know, level of competition, right? We always say that when you look at superheroes, well, you have to judge them by their competition. Like, okay, you know, Spider-Man is more powerful than Batman, because you can tell, because look at Spider-Man's villains compared to Batman's villains, right?
Exactly.
So
Yep.
when you look at, I know David's probably gonna have something to say about that. But anyway, when you look at, Star Wars Episode 1, okay, Obi-Wan versus Maul. Okay, Maul is pretty good, but it's like, okay, when you take Obi-Wan to fight against Dooku now, who's a more seasoned, not only was a seasoned Jedi, but he's also kind of a seasoned Sith Lord. Obi-Wan doesn't fare as well. But then he goes again the second time. The second time against Dooku in Episode 3, and he gets dispensed rather easily. And I don't think it's necessary that he was arrogant. I think that because Obi-Wan's reputation at that time was known as the negotiator, he was more on the political diplomacy type thing, where Anakin was more so about that action. Anakin was really trying to be more of a better warrior, and he was, honestly, it just seems like he practiced more with his lightsaber a lot more than Obi-Wan did, because Obi-Wan was kind of using more creative tactic. He was more like, all right, I don't want to have to fight. He's kind of like the Roger Moore to Sean Connery.
I
Where
guess.
Anakin's
But
more Sean Connery.
Can we please just take a second to acknowledge that really that whole dispensing of Obi-Wan was a plot device that George Lucas put in there because it was the Anakin Dooku Palpatine thing that was really the crux of the story, and it was really nothing more than a storyline device to knock out Obi-Wan right away. I mean, it wasn't really that's the problem with Star Wars, actually, is that ultimately this is a fantasy type of a thing, and it's, this is where the fans can read a lot into stuff when there's the real world explanation, and then we got to come up with the in-universe explanation in order to justify that. But I would buy that. I mean, I would buy the idea that by this time in Obi-Wan's life, maybe he was a little bit more, except for the fact that he did, I mean, look, he went up against Grievous, who was wielding like 4 lightsabers against him. Right? I mean, he ended up having
the Force, though.
No, but just because you don't have the Force, I can count if you really go through the expanded universe and a lot of the comics, I mean, that's where I think a lot of people really start to get scrambled with it. I mean, yeah, a Force user is going to be a little bit more powerful, but if you got powerful people, it doesn't matter if they have the Force or not. They're still going to be a formidable enemy. I mean, Grievous was trained in the Jedi arts. He did not have the Force, but he was trained in every other facet. And he collected all those lightsabers from Jedi that he beat. So it wasn't like Grievous was a weak enemy. So, I mean, again, he did knock Obi-Wan basically off of a cliff, more or less, and Obi-Wan had to use a blaster against him. But he beat him. And it's one of those things where you do have to go well-rounded, right? Because in some cases, Obi-Wan is considered the greatest of the Jedi, and then there's other times where, how many times have we made fun of it, right? Where, Obi-Wan's just like vanquished in like 30 seconds or something, and then somebody else has to pick up the mantle. So there's that everyman thing, but then there's also some of the other elements of it, which I do find hilarious. But you do also have to, I think, factor in some of the real world stuff as well. David said, off of the Vader choke alone, Mr. Darkseid himself is subjectively top 2. Again, you're going by power. We're talking about favorites. Favorites has nothing to do with power. It has nothing to do with attributes. It's all who resonates with you. That's what today's thing is about. Then there's the voice, iconic, the suit. Y'all are my favorites. There's no better Star Wars discussion on the web. Well, we appreciate that, David. That's why we're here, as Obi-Wan would say. As my number 4 guy would say. But you also have to remember that if you're talking about Vader, Vader is a Sith Lord. So there's kind of a little bit of a... So Anakin is a little bit different. Not too different from somebody like Dooku, except for the fact that you can look at them as 2 different characters. Is that once Anakin abandoned the Jedi and became a Sith Lord, you have to really consider him more in the Sith than the Jedi. So even if we were talking about power, Anakin would definitely be up there as even a Jedi I'm talking about. But we would be talking about pre-Vader Anakin, or another way that you can look at the discussion is maybe if Anakin had never turned to the dark side, you could speculate on his power as a Jedi, which even George Lucas himself basically said, look, if Anakin had never turned, he'd be like hands down the most powerful guy, which, you know, he was conceived by the Force. I mean, I think this surprises exactly no one, right?
All right.
Okay, now here it comes. You were ready for this. You called it. He said Daryl is being disrespectful to Batman. Batman will run circles around Spider-Man. That is so not true. Also, Daryl basically called Obi-Wan lame. I bet Ahsoka is Daryl's number 3. Put a coffee on it, Daryl. Ooh, do you want to put a coffee on it, David? How much are you willing to put a coffee on it, David? How much are you going to donate to us? That's what I want to know. You know, you gotta.
In the spirit of Batman, you better be sure.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing: Spider-Man is so much more powerful than Batman. It's not even. It's not even a contest. Oh, David said, "Let's do it." He said, "Let's do it." Well, how much, David? Ahsoka being the number 3, yeah. How much? What donation can we expect from you? But see, you got to remember that with Spider-Man. Not that I want to get off on another tangent here, but with Spider-Man, because we're about to get to Daryl's number 3. That's why I got to stall a little bit. See, the thing about Spider-Man is that he's a lot more powerful than people think. He's actually like the number, I think it's like number 3, number 5, like Marvel guy or something.
Mm-hmm.
Because him being bitten by the spider, you have to understand that unlike Batman, Batman is just a superior fighter. He's got all the skills. Spider-Man has like this insane amount of strength and a certain amount. He's not invincible, but he definitely has a lot of endurance. And then, of course, when we were talking about the enemies, that's the thing. I mean, any one of Spider-Man's enemies could just decimate Batman. It wouldn't even be a contest. And any one of Batman's enemies would possess like 0 challenge to Spider-Man. 0. Spider-Man would basically pound the Joker into oblivion. You know, the Riddler, the Penguin. I mean, come on. Spider-Man would just like absolutely kill them within seconds. There wouldn't even be a contest. But you put the Green Goblin, you put the Hobgoblin, you put like Kraven the Hunter, you put Rhino, you put Electro, you put all of these like super villains that Spider-Man has to fight on a daily basis. Sandman, Batman. Now, I'm not saying Batman wouldn't necessarily fare well, because the other thing that a lot of people ignore about Batman is his superior intellect. But Spider-Man has that too. Spider-Man is, Peter Parker. He's like this chemist. He's, he developed all his own weapons. I mean, he's just
not to mention, you really can't sneak up on him.
Yeah, you can't sneak
Batman's
up on
whole
him.
thing is about stealth and doing all this. Spider-Man can sense him.
All right. So, anyway. I don't know how much David intends to donate to us now, but Daryl's number 3 is actually Mace Windu. That's right, Mace Windu. And
yes, sir.
What can you say about Mace? I mean, the guy's just incredible.
Well, much like his lightsaber says, he's a bad mother. Shut your mouth. Yes, Samuel Jackson's portrayal of Mace Windu was great, and it goes right along with his even portrayal in the Clone Wars animated series.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of people actually forget that Mace was a pretty key character in the Clone Wars animated series.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and the thing about Mace is that, he's pretty much almost like a no-nonsense kind of guy. he's very he's very loyal to the order. He really doesn't like things to deviate too much from um the established rule or situation that governs things. So one of his big issues was, he didn't like the fact that the Jedi Order was getting too involved into the Senate, into the government stuff. Like, he thought those should be separate. He was like, we're really not supposed to be this involved in their dealings, but yeah, we keep getting dragged into the stuff. So I always liked the fact that he always kind of kept that at the forefront of his mind. Um, Very powerful. Um, he's really good with the lightsaber. Obviously, he's kind of created his own lightsaber form, which a lot of
Mhm.
people, if you're really not that in tuned, um, didn't even know about him. But he's definitely uh, a swordsman. And then when it comes to his actual abilities, like he, well, even his force abilities, good at hand to hand combat.
Yeah, he's
Like
really good at
even
hand-to-hand combat, and I
yes,
agree. I think that that's an overlooked aspect too.
yeah, because everybody thought he's got a license, like but that's true. However, like if you want to go with him, that means strap up,
Yeah.
because Mace is
Yeah.
no joke when it comes to that.
No.
um,
No. No. I
but we're
mean,
talking about his force abilities, though. Um, he's really good with Form 7, which is kind of like what's it called, Vapad. I think that's the name of it.
yeah, I'm really
Um,
bad with the names of them. I know roughly the deal, but yeah, I know.
Yeah, and he's actually one of two who's able to combine the light and the dark side into his lightsaber form. So that's why he fared so well when he fought Sidious, is because while everybody else got wasted in like 2 seconds, he was able to actually have a full on, battle with him and survive because of that. Because of like, okay, I'm going against a dark side guy. I know a lot of their moves. I know a lot of what they do, and I can take that dark side energy and put that um into my skills, which really became helpful for him against Sidious. But as far as his force abilities, he could use it to greatly enhance his speed. And then he was good at using it for force communication.
Yep.
So as far as being able to talk to other Jedi and things like that, then we saw that in the Clone Wars um animation where like they were trapped somewhere and he was able to like reach out and kind of let some people know like, oh, this is where they are or whatever the case may be, because I think they were running out of air or something like that. And then he's also really good at being a strategist and a general in the Clone Wars, being able to find like shadow points, which are pretty much like weak areas in certain things, whether it's a structure or being able to find like, okay, this is this person's weakness. I see that they favor this or they pay attention to that, so he knows exactly where to poke and pry in order to
Mhm.
cause someone to break. So
No,
um
that's well, and not to mention the fact, and I think a lot of times this gets overlooked, which is really surprising to me because it's kind of obvious in the films. This guy's like number 2 to Yoda. You don't
exactly.
get to be number 2 on the Jedi Council basically, and I think he's considered a grandmaster, honestly. Um yeah, he's definitely formidable. I mean, he fared, some would argue that he actually beat Sidious. Now, of course, we don't really know because, Sidious at this point was trying to seduce Anakin to the dark side, and this is all part of his plan. But, I mean, really, when you look at it, and I think you're right. I mean, he was drawing upon the dark side. He does know the dark side tricks. He's studied in their forms, and he's one of the few. There are a couple. There was some in the High Republic that did this. Mace did this. There were a few people since then that did this, where they would channel the dark side, but it's not like they're giving into fear, anger, hatred, all that stuff. But they're channeling it and using it in combat without necessarily succumbing to it. So I think that was an important distinction. You know, Mace is a guy in that sense. Let's get to some of these chats. Oh, David, yeah, you know, Ahsoka wasn't number 3, so gonna expect that donations.
So you got my money?
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of David, he said Batman is everyone's kryptonite. If Batman can beat Superman, he'll cut Spider-Man in half. The Joker is deadly. He can manipulate Spider-Man. Well, Batman can only beat Superman in any kind of thing because of the kryptonite thing. See, Spider-Man doesn't have those kind of weaknesses. The Joker being able to manipulate Spider-Man, I would say
Possibly.
that would depend on when we're talking about. If we're talking a little closer to the teenage Spider-Man, I would say, yeah, that could actually be a thing. Although he still has a spider sense that would warn him of stuff. If you're talking about later Spider-Man, no, not a chance. Because the Green Goblin has the same kind of manipulative thing going on that the Joker has. And, you know, we see how that is. Now, Ronaldo says his number 3 is Kanan Jarrus, who was actually almost on my list, by the way. I love that he is a flawed master that still has things to learn, and his love story with Hera is lovely. Yeah, that was one of the things that, and keep in mind, if you read the very first new canon novel, so in other words, when Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney, and then Disney announced, okay, all the expanded universe stuff, yeah, that's all going to be called Legends now. And anything that we release from now on is going to be this new canon. A New Dawn was the very first book that was released in the new canon. And A New Dawn focused very heavily on how Kanan met Hera and how Kanan was very much like Obi-Wan was in the Obi-Wan series, or now the main character's name escapes me, from Jedi Fallen Order. They were basically more or less former Padawans that never really made it to master level, but they're kind of in hiding now, and you know, they just have normal jobs and everything. Hera was the one that really brought Kanan back to his Jedi roots and got him to join her crew, and hey, you need to operate within the rebellion at some point. So that novel alone, if you've never read it, I highly recommend it. I forgot the name of the bad guy in that. The bad guy was really cool. The villain was awesome. One of the best Star Wars villains ever, by the way. It was a really good book. And so I would highly recommend that to anybody that hasn't read it. It's not that long of a book. It's not a difficult read. You could probably even do it on Audible or something at this point. But it really does give you a little bit of insight into Kanan, and it does enrich quite a bit, actually, the Rebel series. So, yeah, I could... Look, he almost made my list. If we were doing a top 10, he would probably be there. Ronaldo goes on to say, he's a big example of when a character's story ends with his death. No fake death, no resurrection, just the appropriate way to end the character's arc. I totally agree. He goes on to say, by the way, I never understood how and when he and Hera had that kid. You watch Rebels, they never had time to, do it. Well, it wasn't like they were showing us every second of their lives, right? I mean, Hera's kind of hot. It probably wouldn't take him long to, knock one out. I'm just saying.
Force push.
Yeah, I mean, right. I'm sure there's like Jedi techniques to enhance, sexual pleasure or something. And then Ronaldo also goes, the only Batman villains that could beat Spider-Man are Bane, Mad Bat, Killer Croc, and maybe Ra's al Ghul. Yeah, that's actually a good point. Those probably are. If you had to choose Batman villains that could beat him, those would be the ones. I mean, even then, though, Spider-Man, he's way more powerful than, because you also have to understand that we're talking about the comic book version. I mean, forget the Tobey Maguire and all this other stuff that you've seen. I mean, Spider-Man is immensely powerful. I mean, we're talking about, when you look at Marvel, like their actual ranking of the superheroes, he's like the 5th most powerful guy. He's up there, man. He's way more powerful than what people understand. If you're just a casual fan and you only understand Spider-Man from, maybe some of the general stuff, and then you're watching the movies or whatever, then yeah, you really don't understand Spider-Man. Again, I mean, look, I've been reading these comics for ages, so just saying. All right. He says, by the way, Venom was able to fight Spider-Man and Superman at the same time, so maybe Spidey's villains are stronger. Yes, Spidey's villains are really, really powerful. That's, okay. So David said, Ahsoka is my number 3. Ronaldo is on fire tonight with the Raja Ghul shout-out. And then, of course, Ronaldo is like, oh, yes, I am. All right, good. We got a love fest in the chats tonight. That's great.
Great. Let's start playing Can You Feel the Love Tonight?
I mean, Can You Feel the Love Tonight? Yeah, exactly. It's like, all right, that's hey, I'm glad everybody's getting along today. But
right.
Look, Ahsoka almost made my list. I mean, I said in the beginning of the show, actually, it's probably going to surprise people. Spoiler alert, that Ahsoka's actually not on my list. But she very nearly was. I mean, I love Ahsoka, right? I mean, she's just a fantastic character. Like I said, she's one of the only ones that we've seen grown from basically the very beginning when she entered the Jedi Order all the way through now. And, David has the unfortunate news that Daryl, you've been replaced. I mean, I guess Ronaldo is the new you. Yeah, I know. All right, well, so guess what? Mace is my number 3 as well. And one of the things that I love that character because, again, I mean, you had that light and dark balance that he has. One of the things that really increased my love for him, and you have to understand that I've loved Mace Windu ever since I saw him in The Phantom Menace. And he didn't really have a whole lot to do in that movie, but I sensed that he was a great character. Then they expanded him a little bit in Attack of the Clones and then gave him a little bit of a battle scene. And he basically seems to me like he's Yoda's enforcer. He's the guy that's like, he's the number 2
He's the Vader
guy.
to...
Yeah, he's the
like
Vader
to Palpatine.
Yes. And, he's quite powerful. And then there was a book that was originally supposed to be a Clone Wars episode. So back when the Clone Wars ended in season 5. Season 5 ended. They're going to go into season 6, but that was when Disney bought Lucasfilm. And they chose not to really go on with it. But what they did was they compiled a bunch of episodes because they had a ton of scripts. They had enough scripts to fill a season 6. But what they did instead was they took some of the incompleted shows, because there were episodes for what would have been season 6 that were in various stages of completion. And they basically put them together and they released a season 6, but it wasn't really what it would have been. Okay, and there was only like 12 episodes in the Clone Wars season 6. What they did with the rest of them was they ended up becoming books or something else. Like you had Master and Apprentice, which was essentially an unfinished Clone Wars episode. But then you also had another book called Dark Disciple. And Dark Disciple was supposed to be a Clone Wars episode, but it ended up becoming a book. And that book basically was focused on Asajj Ventress and Quinlan Vos. And they eventually kind of fell in love with each other, and it was a really cool, weird love story that wasn't traditional or anything like that. But it was one of the few Star Wars books that I actually, and I'm not kidding, I cried at the end of it because it was that moving emotionally and that sort of sad, I guess. But the reason I bring that up is because Mace was really interesting in that book because he was extremely dark. He hated Asajj Ventress. He was trying to get her killed. He was even willing to sacrifice Quinlan. I mean, it's just it's a fantastic book. It's actually one of the best books that I've read in Star Wars, but it's especially good if you love the character of Asajj Ventress and also if you love the character of Mace. So that was just, again, brilliant writing. You know, you can't say enough about Mace Windu. I think he's actually an underrated character. I do hope that at some point they not necessarily replace him, but actually, I actually misspoke a little bit. I hope what they do is they say that he's alive. I mean, look, Darth Maul survived getting chopped in half and falling down a shaft. I mean, if you really think about it, all that happened to Mace was he got his hands chopped off and thrown out the window. I mean, I'm just saying, there's room to bring him back if they want to. And Samuel Jackson is willing to come back. So, you know, there is that. All right, so let's get to Daryl's number 2. All right, Daryl's number 2. Daryl's number 2 is Yoda.
Yoda. You seek Yoda.
I mean, look, this is probably not really a surprise. I think the number 1 and 2 probably are not going to be a surprise to anybody. But why did you choose Yoda?
I mean, why not? I mean,
well, yeah.
I mean, Yoda it's Yoda, man.
But again, it's not necessarily like powerful, right? I mean, we're dealing with favorites, and because it's a favorite thing, it's more like a personal thing. So,
yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, how can you not like Yoda? Doesn't mean like Yoda is one of those. He's the grandfather. He's the wise old sage. You know, he's the one that you kind of go to kind of. He may not give you the answer, but he'll put you on the path to finding the answer. Immensely powerful though, humble, hilarious, you know, even back in his, I guess, youth or younger days, like he was always kind of known for kind of like making even we were just talking about Mace Windu. Because Yoda would kind of like tell jokes or try to do stuff to make Mace almost like lighten up, and Mace he'd never found Yoda's humor funny. So I just love that kind of connection between the two of those characters. And Yoda's just always that elder statesman that just really has the bird's eye view on what's going on for the most part. He loves working with kids. You know, that was one of his favorite things is teaching younglings because of their innocence, because they just, you know, he could really just almost love on them without giving them love, if that makes sense, because that's kind of one of the things they kind of have to kind of keep from them. But he didn't deny them affection, if that makes sense.
No, he was really good at that, right? He knew how to balance really teaching the kids, being serious with them, but then also having a little bit of fun with them, you know, giving them what they need. If they were down or whatever, he would give them the affection they needed or whatever. But he was really good at that, but he wasn't overly, you know, he wasn't over the top with it.
Yeah, but then you, on the flip side, you get to see how really powerful this guy is, man. I mean, like, you know, he goes from like this kind of quirky, fun-loving, kind of eccentric I want to say old man, but he's not really a man, but you know, male. And then, you know, the next minute, you know, he's like in the heat of battle and he's absorbing force lightning. I mean, he's a monster with the lightsaber. He's flipping all over the place. You know, you just see what he's able to do despite his size. You know, he doesn't let that stop him because he's really sold out to the Force, and he really understands its power, its capabilities, what he's able to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, so
Well,
it's
and it's kind of
that's
a
why I love
one
him.
of the things that I like about Yoda, and it goes along with what you're saying, is the fact that Yoda, he doesn't expend power unnecessarily. He is like the ultimate in control. He only expends power when he has to, and he expends the right amount of power. He never shows off. He's not trying to show how powerful he is because he doesn't have to, right?
Hmm.
He is the epitome of balance in the Force, and that's one of the things that I like too. All right,
Yeah, I mean, he's really cool that way,
really
and
cool. All
yeah,
right,
I think the last part of what Yoda though, I would just say is that um he's he's one of those types of characters that, you know, always has a lesson. He's kind of like the Miyagi. He always has a lesson within the lesson time sometimes. And I always love that about him. And then of course you have to love the interesting way that he communicates when he talks backwards. So I thought that was just an interesting touch when they put that in the movie, the fact that he has this almost like dyslexic way of speaking.
all right. Well, David said Vader is my number two, so I'm guessing you mean Anakin because again, Vader is a Sith Lord. Vader can't be your number two because we're talking about Jedi, not Sith. But if you're talking about Anakin, then that's fair game. And I can, like I said, I can totally understand that. Ronaldo also says that his number two is Yoda. He's wise, he's powerful, but not perfect, as we saw by not helping Anakin. And that's actually a good thing that you have to look at when you look at Yoda and you think, okay, he's got all this wisdom, he has all this knowledge in the Force, he can feel all these different things, he can sense all these different things. And yet, here was Anakin falling to the dark side under all of their noses, and nobody really.
Hmm.
I mean, they kind of sensed it in a way, but they didn't really understand, I think, how serious it was. Now, a lot of that, I think, you can chalk up to the fact that Sidious was blocking the light side of the Force. And so he was kind of screwing with them a little bit. And I think that that was clouding some of their perception. But I think a lot of the other thing too was that they never really had experience with that before. So I mean, why would you think? I mean, why would anybody slip when they're so absorbed in the light side and everything? Um, Ronaldo goes on to say, and I love his whole "I'm a silly guy" act at Dagobah. If you see that without knowing who Yoda is, you'll be very surprised, and we all were, right? Because I remember watching this as a kid in 1980 when the thing was first released in the theater. We're like, all right, who's this guy? And he's, he even says, oh, Yoda, you seek Yoda. And it's just kind of like you think that he's almost this comic relief, Jar Jar like guy that maybe he's going to play with Luke a little bit and then he'll eventually lead him to Yoda and then we'll meet Yoda. But when you actually get the revelation that that is Yoda, you're completely taken by
Hmm.
surprise. And of course, a lot of that was a test. It was a test to see where Luke's patience was at. And of
Hmm.
course, Yoda was known as a prankster in the Jedi Order. That was part of his thing, which again, it's another interesting facet, interesting layer into his personality. And of course, that's why unsurprisingly, Yoda's my number two. Now, I also chose to do a little bit of a High Republic photo of him because if anybody's been following the High Republic, now Yoda's been largely absent from it. During the time of the High Republic, Yoda makes an appearance in some of the earlier comics. Now, I'm not sure. I will admit that I'm a little bit behind in the High Republic novels. I've read like 2 or 3 of them, but there's like, I don't know, 6, 7 of them or something like that by now. I don't know if Yoda actually makes an appearance in any of the later ones, but they pretty much explain that during the High Republic times, Yoda has decided to take a sabbatical and just sort of focus on himself, on teaching, things like that. So he's he's more or less there, but he's out of pretty much the main action. Now, if you have read some of the stuff that he's in, it's interesting because he's definitely a key member of the High Republic, but he has yet to take on the Jedi Order, right? During the High Republic era, Avar Chris is really more or less in charge of everything. They're not quite as organized and everything as they become when Yoda takes over, which is only going to be like a couple of hundred short years later. So, I mean, well, but I mean, when you're talking about the 10,000 plus years that the Jedi have been in existence, this is kind of a drop in the bucket, right? I mean,
true.
It's sort of like, you have to think in terms of, like, the United States is only like 250 some years old, I mean, when you really stop and think about that and everything that happens in that time, but then when you frame that with world history and some of these other countries that have existed for thousands of years, you're kind of like, well, all right, I guess it's not that much time. But Yoda, he's really interesting because each of the eras that he appears in, he's pretty much what I would call like the anchor or the central figure. He's the guy, he's the glue that holds it together. And there's just so many interesting facets to him. And again, he has wisdom, but he also has patience. He has immense power, but he doesn't feel the need to show it off. None of this was more apparent than in the whole Empire Strikes Back scene where, Luke is just getting all frustrated. He goes to lift the X-Wing and he's like, oh, it's impossible, whatever. And then, of course, Yoda does it. No problem. And, Yoda could have shown him all this power in the beginning, but he doesn't. He shows it when it's necessary. And that's, I think, something that it's a good lesson for everybody, really. But, yeah. I think that's really cool. Now, let's get to some of these chats because, that's what we do. We're a discussion show. So Ronaldo says, I like Yoda's gangster look in that image. Yeah, I know. That's one of the reasons why I chose it, because I want to remind people that he's one of those guys that when you go back and you see him younger, when there was rumors that there was going to be a Yoda standalone film, a lot of people had some mixed reactions on that. They almost had the same reaction as they did with the Boba Fett standalone film. It's like, okay, I want to see this guy in an ensemble movie, not necessarily a standalone movie. So with Yoda, it became, I wouldn't mind seeing him in an overall High Republic movie, but I don't know if I would really want to see an origin story on him. I personally sat on the fence that way. I actually think an origin story, if you did Yoda and then you also did Palpatine, or maybe you combine them. So you juxtapose them. Now, of course, it'd be different time periods, but it would be interesting to see one of the most powerful light side guys juxtaposed with one of the most powerful dark side guys in a film. And you could do something maybe interesting with that. I don't know. I haven't just came up with this just now, so I don't, don't hold me to that right now. Ronaldo goes on to say, he's like, F with me, you won't. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Yoda definitely is one of those guys who he's just the ultimate in temperament and everything else. And what's cool is whenever he appears, like I remember when he appeared in the Clone Wars, there's like a sense of calm and, hey, he's got this kind of a thing that you get even as a viewer. Oh, it's going to be okay because Yoda's here now. And if you really stop and think about how many appearances this character has made versus how much we know and just the feelings that we have when he comes on screen, I mean, even in The Last Jedi, he was such a calming influence, not just on Luke, but even on us as the viewers. Like, it was like the eye of a hurricane. there was that familiarity that you get and everything else. It's the brilliance of the character that gives you that. That's like a really well-written, well-rounded character. And for that reason, I think that's why he made both of our number 2 list. Question is, who made our number 1 list? Well, I would think if I were a betting man and if you guys, just stop
Careful,
and think.
David tried that earlier.
Well, yeah, but I mean, look, it's really no surprise. And so I try to give us a couple of cool depictions of them because that's what I tried to do. So Daryl's number 1, Luke Skywalker. Now this particular picture is great. It's from the expanded universe. Yes, Luke did actually use Force lightning in the expanded universe. The expanded universe of Luke was actually pretty cool. Pretty cool. But Luke is an interesting choice because I could almost see Yoda being the number 1. So why was Yoda for you number 2 and Luke was number 1?
The thing I like about Luke that kind of like won it over eventually is because eventually he did reach his potential becoming a grandmaster and as being pretty much super powerful. So I love seeing him reach his conclusion, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think about Luke is that after you get past him in A New Hope, really, the thing I love about Luke is that he's driven, but he wasn't whiny after like A New Hope. He was just very driven, and I love the fact that he was so optimistic. He was positive. He was kind of a dreamer in a way. He was always kind of like looking for a better tomorrow, I guess, in a way. And then the thing about Luke is that, of course, he's very loyal to his friends, but he's also his creativity, his ingenuity. Like once again, it was just always, I think, especially in Return of the Jedi, like one of my favorite scenes is just like he told 3PO, he was like, "Yeah, tell them if you don't let us go, you become angry and you'll use your magic." And he's like, "Magic? What magic? What are you talking?" He's like, "Just tell them." And then Luke starts using the Force and start making it look like 3PO's floating around and he's getting angry, and of course that's what causes the Ewoks to like let them all go because they're like, we don't want to take this guy off. So it's just stuff like that. I love the wisdom the wisdom that he kind of carried, especially when you got to Return of the Jedi, because unlike his dad in the third act, which would be Revenge of the Sith, Anakin was very powerful and but he was still unbridled. Luke was very much more, had that Obi-Wan he kind of like married the two. Like he had a little bit of the Obi-Wan, but he also had Yoda, a lot of Yoda in him.
Well, that's
And
a
he
good
kind of
point,
carried
actually.
himself. He kind of carried himself much more like Yoda would have if
Mm-hmm.
Yoda wasn't human. Like that's kind of how he did things. And Luke, once again, like his dad, phenomenal pilot. He was very loyal to his friends, Han, Chewie. He even had a good sense of humor. He was like, when when Han was just kind of like, you're gonna die here. That whole line.
Well, yeah, because Luke was like,
Just
I used to live here, and then Han's like, you're gonna die here,
die
I
here.
mean, yeah, the chemistry that Luke and Han had was great. That's why
Yeah.
I really think it was a disservice that we didn't get to see that chemistry again in the sequel trilogy. I really wish they had paired them up at least for The Force Awakens. But, I mean, and again, Luke was immensely powerful too. I mean, when you go into the expanded universe, especially,
Yeah, he
there
became
was
like a
that one
god
book
practically.
pretty much. I mean, they had the Superman problem. That's why they had to create the Yuuzhan Vong, which, by the way, I did a show on those guys like last Friday. The problem with Luke was that, there's that one thing to where he was a prisoner and he took his lightsaber and just used the Force and guided it around the ship and was, killing people with it and stuff. And I mean, he just became so immensely powerful. But again, I think that was one of the things that drew people to him, was the fact that here you have this guy who had this really humble beginning. In a lot of ways, it's what I think a lot of people like about Ahsoka. You see Luke essentially from the beginning of his journey, and you see him become immensely powerful. And you juxtapose that with Anakin and how Anakin was, because both of them, in their own way, were the chosen ones. And what happened with Luke ended up becoming supremely powerful. And you can tell, so when Luke got to be his like full-fledged Jedi status, basically, I mean, sure, Yoda said, no, you still got to face your father or whatever. It's like, all right, whatever. But just watch the way Luke is at the beginning of Return of the Jedi when he's going into Jabba's palace.
Yeah.
You got some chills, man. I mean, let's just say it, right?
Yeah.
That door opens and you just see that silhouetted figure in the cloak and you're like, wow, and then he's reaching out, he's like choking Gamorrean guards, Then he flips his cloak, and just the way he's talking to Jabba and everything, it's just like, listen, you're gonna die if I don't get my way, because I'm Luke Skywalker, I'm a Jedi, I'm extremely powerful at this point. I mean, even at the point of Return of the Jedi, he was pretty powerful. I mean, you can even tell in that Vader duel. You juxtapose the Vader duel that he had in Empire Strikes Back versus the one in Return of the Jedi.
Vader's using two hands.
Yeah, Vader's using lightsaber. Two hands now, and Luke is way more formidable than he was. And that is not even like a tenth of his power where we see in this picture over there.
Yeah. Another thing, even I mean, granted, like even the Palpatine kind of he definitely noticed, like, okay, all right, even though he said your hate has made you powerful, but it was still like he still recognized that, Luke was definitely formidable, and that's why he wanted him. But then the other part of it too is that, like, on top of being, ace pilot or whatnot, we saw him in The Mandalorian, and like when you see him show up and just the way he was just dismantling those droids, like his command over the Force was just, and like his sense of calm, though, once again, he just kind of casually is like walking through stuff, moving things out of the way, pulling things to him, just cutting it down. It's like another day at the office for him. It's like whatever. And that's
it's like once you vanquish the Emperor and Vader, it's like what challenge is there? Now, of course, in the expanded universe, we get a little bit more, because obviously with the sequel trilogy, they went in a different direction. But in the old expanded universe, now Legends, you do get, okay, this is what would have happened if Luke had just gone on and again, I mean, they could still do that even in new canon, right? Because, I mean, obviously the Mandalorian was new canon. The nice thing about the sequel trilogy is it happens like 30 years after Return of the Jedi. So they could still, if they want, give us a little bit of that really cool Luke action. Let me get to some of these chats before I reveal my infamous number one. Now, of course, Ronaldo makes a joke. He says, my number one, I forgot how to pronounce this. That guy is cool. He's a real guy, by the way. I forgot where he's from. He said, just kidding. It's Obi-Wan. His whole arc from beginning to end is my favorite. And look, I could probably reorder some of these guys because, again, Obi-Wan was, he was on my list because Obi-Wan's a really compelling character. I mean, let's face it. And I can understand. He's another guy we've seen from the beginning. And Ronaldo goes on to explain. He says, look, you could see that he wasn't really ready to be a master because he failed at the end with Anakin. And That's true. He goes on to say honorable mentions: Luke, Ahsoka, Qui-Gon. Luke and Qui-Gon we've had on our list. Shakti, Cal Kestis. That's the guy from Fallen Order. And Aayla Secura. All good choices. By the way, he says, this guy's a real guy. Look it up. And this is interesting. He says, I would like to add Ben Solo, but he's more dark side. No. He turned to the dark side and became Kylo Ren. But don't forget, he went back to being Ben Solo. Ben Solo. So the Ben Solo Kylo Ren is very much like the Anakin Vader thing, right? So as long as Ben is Ben, he's good. When he becomes Kylo, he's bad. And then, of course, when he goes back to being Ben, he's good. And he's another guy. Honestly, he almost made my list. I was thinking of putting him at number 5 because maybe even higher. Because to be honest, I loved the whole Ben Solo thing. Like, once again, I was pretty much dead set against Kylo Ren being redeemed or any of that. But then when I saw it on screen, I'm like, wow, not only am I into this, but I wish they had shown us more Ben Solo, actually. And because of that, he almost made my list because he was instantly one of my favorite Jedi. But here's the thing, and this is the reason why I left him off. I left him off because we just didn't get to see enough of him versus some of these other guys that we've had on our list. And I'm sure you feel the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So now, David finally admits, I misunderstood the question. I was thinking Force users. Luke is my number 1. Okay. So Lucas Darrell's number 1. Lucas David's number 1. Now that he's on board and understands what we're doing.
I took you all show. But
Luke is, it took him all show. Luke is also my number 1. And it's really much for the same reason. And honestly, so Luke was somebody, because I've always been like a Han Solo guy. But again, if we're talking about Jedi, right, that kind of eliminates Han. But the thing is, it was the expanded universe version of Luke that really made me go, wow, I really love this character. And again, it's because we get to see him going from somebody who didn't even know what the Force was to now he's a Grandmaster. I mean, you have to understand that Luke, by the time he gets to around the time of The Mandalorian, which of course is what we're seeing now, we're seeing that part of the scene in this shot. This is from season 2 of The Mandalorian. You pointed out when we were talking about Luke is your number 1 about how, he's just like, here's these death troopers, right? And I mean, it took like 5 guys or something to take out one of these guys. Luke goes in and with just the calm of going to buy a cup of coffee, dispatches like hundreds of these things. And that, it just shows you one of the reasons why I think a lot of people, especially expanded universe fans, loved that season finale of The Mandalorian was because there's 2 things. One, this is the Luke Skywalker that we wanted to see in the sequel trilogy. Secondly, this is the Luke Skywalker that you see in the expanded universe. This is the culmination of all that Luke went through, all the knowledge he obtained. This is pretty much what he had become. He basically was what Anakin should have been had Anakin never turned to the dark side. And for that reason, Luke is just, immensely powerful at this point. And we get to see a glimpse of that at the end of The Mandalorian, of course. But I'm hoping that they actually do some more canonical stuff that maybe takes place within the 10 years after Return of the Jedi. That's my hope anyway. But yes, absolutely, Luke is just astoundingly powerful. he is the embodiment. He has that calm of Yoda. He's got that ease and grace of Obi-Wan, but he has the power of Anakin. I mean, he really is the package to the
Hmm.
point where the expanded universe version of Luke Skywalker like eclipsed everybody. I mean, it was at
Yeah.
that point Palpatine wouldn't have even been. There was like a clone of Palpatine that appeared in the books. And I mean, Luke, he was nothing. Like Luke was able to pretty much vanquish him. You know, it's kind of like, yeah, no, this isn't the boy that, you basically faced on that Death Star. It's like, no, 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 no. I am Grandmaster Skywalker now, and this is pretty much how it's going to be. And it really took creating characters like the Yuuzhan Vong to even give him any kind of a
Competition.
challenge. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that this is a really good balance. Now, again, Ronaldo brought up a bunch of really cool honorable mentions. And I have to say, now, I mean, and of course, I want to get your thoughts on this too, but this is kind of at first, it was sort of a difficult list for me. But then when I really stopped and thought about it, I'm like, okay, well, who are the people that really are my favorite? I mean, look, Luke Skywalker, Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, all these guys, it's kind of a no-brainer in a way, because even some of these other ones that I find really interesting, really cool, like I said, Ben Solo was definitely a big one on my list. I just haven't had enough time with them that they would eclipse these others, my favorites. Now, again, as we tried to explain in the beginning, David finally caught up. If we were talking about most powerful, if we were talking about any of the other metrics that you can measure these guys that would be a little bit more objective, then absolutely this list may look different. Although I would say I think Luke would still be number one, because canonically speaking, Luke basically eclipsed everybody. So I think Luke would still be number one on both of our lists. I think Yoda would still be number two on our lists. Mace Windu very well could have been number three still, because both of us had the same top three. Now, we were basing it on who our favorites were and maybe who spoke to us a little bit. But I mean, if you really want to be honest, even if you're talking about an order of power, right? I mean, unless you want to bring in the father and the sister from the Clone Wars, because they were more light side people. I mean, sure, you can make that argument. There's other people maybe from Legends that you can bring in, and you can go, okay, certainly Kip Duran, if you're bringing in Legends characters, would make that list, because that guy was pretty much second only to Luke as far as power goes in the expanded universe I'm talking about. So he would have to be on the table if we were talking about powerful. Then of course you got to go back to the Old Republic maybe, and you got to factor in some of those guys. I mean, if you're talking about a power thing, or you could even frame this the top 5 most popular Jedi, that list might look different. Maybe Yoda would be number 1 on that list. But we were doing something a little bit different.
Yeah, I think with this list, that's why I kind of wanted to bring like Plo Koon into it, because I mean, I could have very easily put Obi-Wan on there, but I had to really think about it. Like, I kind of figured he would be on your list, to be quite honest. And then, but Plo Koon's always been an interesting character to me, and I think he's one of those underrated guys. But he was definitely around, and especially when you see a lot of his dealings in the Clone Wars animated series, and that's where it becomes a part, because it's like, where do you? Why are they? You know what I mean? Because you have to
Right.
have a frame of reference for it. And so my frame of reference is watching, the animated series with Clone Wars, and seeing how he's done things in that realm. And then, he was cool. He kind of had little minor moments here and there on uh in the movies or whatever, but the Clone Wars is where he really kind of shone through.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, again, I think that when you really stop and look at, because that's a good point too, right? You almost have to look through all the different. I mean, you would have to look through all the comics. You'd have to look through all the novels. You'd have to. You could really expand this discussion to a wide variety of medium. I mean, even when they come out with different series, when they came out with the Obi-Wan series, that sort of put Obi-Wan even in a different light. I mean, I just think that there's a lot of things that you can do with this that are just different. Not sure I understand this message. This is like,
Oh,
I mean, I know he's talking about
oh,
Dooku.
yeah. He said, "Is Dracula a Jedi like Anakin?"
Yeah, okay.
So Dooku was a Jedi prior to going to the Sith, much like Anakin. Yeah. So the answer to your question is yes.
And again, he was one of what we call the Lost 20. And the Lost 20 is somebody that we will definitely do a show on at some point soon, because I think that there's a lot of interest in there, and it would probably make for an interesting discussion. And for people who don't know, it's a good review of, hey, because they're important. I mean, the Lost 20, again, it's funny because one of the commenters on our last show, when we were talking about midi-chlorians, he kind of put it in a funny way. He's like, this discussion is sort of like a denominational thing where, you're just debating on which force thing you want to follow or something, the midi-chlorian versus just
Oh,
keeping it fantasy. And
all right.
where it's kind of a nerdy type of a thing, right? And it's like, well, yeah, and we often say, look, we're the Star Wars show for normal people, but at the same time, we're a Star Wars show. I mean, it's kind of like, this is the place that you would discuss this kind of thing. If you were discussing like an overall cinematic kind of a thing, and then Star Wars is one of your subjects, yeah, you might use some broad strokes on that. But that's what I think, why that particular show resonated with so many people, because people do have a different view on, are midi-chlorians a good thing for the Star Wars universe, or should they have just left it alone and kept it a mystery? And there's actually people that float both ways on that. Same thing with this. When you deal with top 5 favorite Jedi, well, okay, if we're not going objective and we're not talking about power or popularity or any of these other things where you can give hard measurements and say, hey, this is why we're doing this. Well, okay, this person is, your 4th favorite. Well, why are they your 4th favorite? Between us, between everybody else that's chatting in, between the eventual comments that we're going to get. See, to me, that's a more interesting discussion, because now this is, why does this particular Jedi land with you? Like, what was it about the writing? What was it about maybe the portrayal, the acting? What was it about just the overall character that really resonated with you? Because you get to know people that way. And of course, when you deal with the Lost 20, it's something that a lot of Star Wars fans know of, but I don't really know how much anybody's really delved into it. I mean, Dooku is the most famous one, but by the Lost 20, there was a particular set of Jedi, these 20 Jedi, that abandoned the Jedi way and either became Sith Lords or just left the Jedi Order, or maybe became dark side users, but they weren't Sith Lords. I mean, there's a lot of really cool things that you can get into with that. Now, the next show that we're going to do for Friday's show, this is great because I kind of like the fact that I don't have to ask, what are we going to cover? Because we know. It's sort of like today's show, yeah. And it's basically our top 5 favorite Force powers. Now, you might think that that's limiting, but there's something like 50 to 100 Force powers that you can choose from. Now, granted, a lot of them are pretty obscure. I don't really think from the lists that we have that any of them were particularly obscure. But we have some different one, but it's not like today. I can tell you this right now. Some of the same ones that we might possess are at different spots on the list. And there's actually some good differences. I think there might only be like 2, maybe. There might only be like 2 that you and I had the same thing, but I think they're at different spots. I don't know. I have to go back and look. But you guys can just watch us Friday, 8 o'clock, live, and you will see, what are our top 5 favorite Force powers. And we'll put a poll up, much like I did today, except I'll get it out earlier. We can do that. We can take this whole discussion to Discord, because, again, the link to our Discord server for you guys to join is in there. And we even have special channels for the people who become members. That's right. If you become a Padawan at $5 a month, a Jedi Knight at $10 a month, or a Jedi Master at $25 a month, we have some special Discord channels in there for you, in addition to this other stuff you see, which, of course, we're going to get moving on a little bit because, we got to fulfill some of this stuff. But again, yeah, hop on the Discord anytime. I'm on there most nights. Another thing I was going to say, look, if any of you guys, is kind of a weird commercial to do right now, but if any of you guys are Call of Duty players, I actually have a Call of Duty channel on there. So if you guys want to play Call of Duty with me, hopefully, Daryl, I know you got the PS4. You haven't really gotten it fired up yet. But if you ever hop on that thing, you too can join this. And, we could do some Call of Duty together. I mean, why not, right? But if nothing else, we can at least continue this discussion. Like I said, I'm on there most nights. I'm on there almost every night. So David's got a couple of things that he wanted to say. He starts off by saying, I like that topic a lot. I'm hyped. See? Horsepower thing. It's cool. Actually, a lot of people are liking our topics lately. I like that. We're getting more subscribers. I want to, if you guys are still watching this, I want to welcome all the new subscribers we got. I hope you guys are continuing to like the show. He says, I'm still going to buy your coffee. Yes. There you go. That's right. Because it was actually, he said it was going to be Ahsoka. Who was your number? Oh, Mace. Mace. Mine too. Yeah. All right. Yeah, that guess was unfortunately out the window. All right, I'll stop.
Oh,
I'm just going to,
yes.
You know what? I'm just going to
all right, guys.
Leave that thing.
Well,
right. It's been fun. It's been fun, right? All right. So anyway, yes, I think tonight was an excellent discussion. I'm really looking forward to taking it on the Discord with you over the next few days. Of course, the YouTube comments. If you guys on Twitch are watching, hop on the Discord, because I know Twitch guys love Discord. So you're definitely going to want to do that. Keep it going. With YouTube, there is the comment section. That was pretty much hopping on the last show. Hopefully it is on this show. And then, yeah, join us Friday night at 8. Let's discuss some of our favorite Force powers. So until then, I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.